Hello again. This is the second part of the landscapes video series, I guess, and we are going to be looking at landscape regions as well as some issues that they have and ways of kind of dealing with them. But generally, it's just understanding what they are, how you set them up. That's it. And then we'll go further later on. This basically is a preloaded, or I say preloaded, I set up a preloaded version for you to just sort of see initially before we go in and try and make one from scratch. This is a 4 kilometer or 4.3 kilometer by 4.3 kilometer landscape world partition that has regions set up. So regions are essentially these purple cubes that are floating around the region, the landscape itself. Now what they do essentially is they allow the user to load and unload various chunks of the map. On this example, it's kind of a very basic one. So I've got 4 proxies, which I will explain in a moment. Essentially, they are 4 tiles, which we can load and unload via these regions. Now, the benefit of that is once you have a more complicated landscape, let's say that we actually had more of these proxies, which I am going to explain in a moment. Let's just say that rather than 1 here, this was 16 within this one area, and you also had 16 regions. It would mean that you could kind of choose to only load a certain amount of the map. Now that is kind of used when you are working on huge open worlds and you need to only be able to work on like a piece at a time, because maybe your machine can't handle having the entire map open and loaded at one point. Or it might be that you want to set it up so that various team members work on various parts of the map, and you don't want to mess up any other person's changes on a server, which is usually like subversion networking, which is stuff to do with development teams. So like it stops overlap. That's what I imagine they are for. Now I've just said that's what they're for. That's kind of what I imagine they're for. There's no documentation on them, so that's me just guessing. But essentially, all we can do at the moment is use them to load and unload proxies, which are these chunks, tiles of the terrain. Now, in order to do it, I originally thought you could do it from here, but it doesn't work. So you have to use this world partition menu in order to use them. So if you do not have that open already, which most of you won't, you have to come up to here to window, then come down to world partition and hit this world partition editor button. That will open up this, which you can then drag and dock wherever you like. I like to have it up there. So by standard, when you create a terrain, you won't have it like this, but basically, once you've got this set up, you can then click on these regions or drag and select multiple regions. Once you have the one you want or the multiple regions you want, you right click and you have load or unload selected regions. And then you can obviously do the same thing and load it in. And it works with multiple. Now, depending on your machine and the amount that you're dealing with, depends on the load time or whether it will crash or not. I wouldn't recommend you doing, loading multiple proxies if your machine isn't very good. By that, I don't mean it's bad. It's just that you haven't got the spec. Don't try and do it. do it in pieces, one at a time or a few at a time. That's a case of testing, but always save and, you know, check that stuff out to know what your machine's limitations are. So yeah, that's essentially what they are, and what they might be used for. How do we set them up? That is the question. That is a question. So you can see here I've got a terrain, a landscape, and I've labeled it 16 by 16, and that is in relation to when we create the terrain. We have some settings to decide upon. So I'm not gonna delete this. What I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna leave this and overlay a new terrain by going up to landscape mode. This will be slightly different if you don't have this at all, but basically when you just do it fresh, you'll have these settings. So what I've actually done is I've set up a 4K world partition value terrain. That's what this example is. So I'm going to just match that. I know that this is, I believe, 2 by 2 and 32 by 32. That gives us our 4K resolution 1024 component terrain or landscape. Then in the example, I've done 16 by 16. So these settings will give you the exact landscape that I've already loaded. What I'm doing now is just overlaying a new one, or the setup for a new one, just so we can kind of see it broken up, and we can kind of visualize it and learn that way. So basically, we've already covered these in the previous video. Now we're going to focus on these ones, these two specifically. Edit layers, that's in relation to when you've actually made the landscape. You want to do things like material layers, stuff like that. So I would just recommend to always leave it ticked, unless you want to bypass certain things, but that's deeper knowledge that I think we should forget about. Just leave that one ticked, because you need those edit layers for I'd say 90% of your endeavors. So yeah, basically we're looking at 16 setting. Now what do these settings mean? When we look at the first one, world partition grid size. Number of components per landscape streaming proxy. Now, the per axis bit is kind of like, you know, just it has that at the end of all of these settings. So I would just forget about those for now, because they kind of try and make you think of extra things that you don't need to think of. Basically, this value determines the amount of components per proxy. Now the proxies, let me just pop out of here for one more time, are these tiles that I mentioned before. These are like the selectable, or selectable tiles that make up your landscape or terrain. I keep saying landscape, terrain, whatever you want to call it, but basically that's what those proxies are. And they are made up of a certain amount of components, sections, quads, etc. Basically what we went through in the first video, these values are all contained within those proxies. So we're choosing 16, and that basically means that within one proxy there will be 16 components, or 16 by 16 components. So if we were to count these light green squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And then obviously you can trust me that there's 16 down this one as well. So each proxy is made up of 16 by 16 components. And then obviously each component is, we have 2 by 2 sections within each component, which are these darker green squares within the component. And then each of those sections are made up of a 63 by 63 quad grid. So that basically determines what size proxy you have. Then we go to the second value, which is this well partition region size. So number of components per landscape well partition region. This took me so long to figure out, but it's pretty simple now that I'm kind of reading it with this experienced brain. So yeah, it's very, a lot of people will just be like, yeah, that makes sense. So number of components per landscape well partition region. So in each region we're going to have 16 components, and it's essentially exactly the same as the previous one. We are going to have 16 components within each of these regions. So when we press create, you get this example. You get 4 regions by 4 regions and 4 proxies, and that's basically it. That is literally it. If you wanted to change this so that you had more regions, you would decrease this number. That's what confused me for so long. Took me a while to work it out. So if I wanted like the same amount of well, this wouldn't, yeah, this is where crashes get caused. If I tried to set this to 8, which means there's going to be 8 components per region, we would get a crash because there's actually 16 proxies. I'm pretty sure a 16 and 8 setting will give you a crash because you end up with more you have proxies overlapping regions, if that makes sense. So a setting of 8 would mean that you would have 4 regions per proxy, and I don't think it likes that, and it just basically crashes it out. So in order to do that, you would have to mess with the proxy value as well. So yeah, you can't really have regions when you're generating. You can't have more regions. You can't have regions overlapping into different proxies. I've noticed that just causes crashes. So it's about knowing what you can get away with before you kind of get annoyed while you're getting crashes. But that's the thing, is understanding this kind of helps you out a little bit more. So one of the things we can do is, let's just say we actually want more proxies for whatever reasons. So like these are streaming proxies, so let's just say like you don't want this, say this is like a huge map for you and you don't want these tiles loading in because it's too much for your machine to deal with. You ideally probably want more proxies, less regions. So we'd probably want to actually change the amount of components per proxy. So let's just say we want this to be, we want to double the amount. So we want 4 regions, but we want each region to contain 4 proxies. That would be 8 and 16. And that's basically it. Or even more, if you wanted 16 per region, you would do something like this. So you would end up with 16 regions per proxy. So let's do that as an example. I've never actually tried this one. It might crash, and I'll have to work out why that is. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to hide the old example, and I'm going to hit create. Okay, that's always a good sign that we get to this one, but it doesn't mean that it won't crash. Nope. Okay, we're in a good position. Usually it crashes after that first little blink, once it's trying to like add up everything and work out whether we chose the right settings. But in theory, if I've got this correct, we should have 4 regions, and each region contains 16 proxies. Okay, so we've come out of landscape mode. There we go. So we have 4 regions that contain, and each region contains 16 tiles or proxies. And you get this nice sort of setup all defined for you. Okay, so that's essentially regions. And then, yeah, that's basically it. I'll show you a quick example of kind of loading and unloading more complicated setups. Actually, no. I mean, you'd need more regions to actually increase, you know, the amount of control you have over loading, because we'd be still loading these 16 by these 8 by 8 chunks, which kind of doesn't give you so much control. So yeah, in order to actually get more in-depth control over your landscape, you would probably want to increase the amount of regions that you have. So that would basically mean dropping this down to 8, which would mean that each region would contain 8 components. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we would have, from that, we would have we would double the amount of regions. Yes. Yes, okay, cool. Let me create it. Let's see. We might get a crash. Nope, looks good. So this should be the same amount of proxies, but with double the amount of regions. I believe you could hear that I was getting confused myself then. It can be confusing, so you have got to sit there and kind of probably write down some things. I'm kind of doing this just looking at the screen, so I'm trying to compute in real time, which is definitely not my strong point. But here we go. Lovely. Okay. And you can see in this time it's just kind of not really loaded everything properly. Trying to remember. Okay, so we got this one. Yeah, okay, so that's the one we just made. I'm going to delete the old one. This one. And go to our regions. Load selected regions. Now that kind of thing might crash for some people, but yeah. So now each region contains 4 proxies, but that is a total of 8 by 8 components per region, which is correct. Relative to our settings. So each region has 8 components, sorry. Each region has 8 components, which is 4 proxies. Okay, I hope that helped. You know, you can kind of start to see what you can do with it. I don't know why this one is loaded. I think it's because we've got some kind of overlap. Perhaps. Yeah, okay. So we've got some kind of overlap. But yeah, it doesn't matter. You kind of get the picture. I'm sure you can work things out. I'd have to sit and figure out that myself. But it allows you to kind of come in and load pieces of the map that you want. Interesting. It is intriguing though, what it is. But yeah, I'm sure that you probably are looking at it and going, no, Jake, you stupid idiot. This is what it is. This is why that's happening. But yeah, that's regions, how you set them up. On the next one, I'll be showing you how you get a height map into this without problems, because there are problems that can occur, and I'll show you that in the next video.